Hey everyone, before we dig in here today, did you know that for just 16 cents a day you can support Iconoclast of Things? That's right, your pledge of just $5 a month gets you rewards like high-res photos, early access to Iconoclast of Things episodes, and you get a say in future episodes. Higher pledge amounts earn you archival quality prints of photos from my episodes, or even a chance to be an official guest on Iconoclast of Things. Just go to iconoclastofthings.com and click the Support This Pod link. Now, on to today's episode. If you want to know what it's like to sit behind Mayor Sly James's desk, best not ask him. He'd have to find about 20 minutes in his schedule to clear the space to sit there. There's probably 2 feet of work stacked on the chair and another couple of feet stacked on the desk. Then there's all the work of running a city strewn across the meeting desk in the middle of his office on the 29th floor of Kansas City's City Hall. Now, if you haven't yet, go listen to my previous 2 episodes of the podcast on the Harrison Street DIY skate park in the Columbus Park neighborhood. And you're going to want to download those and check them out either before or after you listen to this interview with Mayor Sly James. Now, after that skate park story aired, the mayor's office arranged some time for us to clear some space on his meeting table and talk about how that skate park can be a model for civic engagement projects. And we also talked about KC's gut-wrenching homicide rate, and the mayor shared some of the things that frustrate city leaders most when they're just trying to make a city a safer place to live.
That's why I like local government. We don't have all these political hang-ups. We have to deliver services every day. The ideological divide over issues like healthcare, seriously, we don't have time for ideological arguments.
We also talked about Turn the Page KC, a program near my heart that's charged with achieving reading proficiency among Kansas City's 3rd graders that earned KC an All-American City honor in June from the National Civic League. Then we talked about KCNOVA, the KC No Violence Alliance. It's a collaboration between law enforcement, data scientists, and community aid groups aimed at reducing crime by redirecting offenders to social services or face the legal consequences. And Mayor James also clued me in on what he's learned about how to solve real problems in our current political climate. So here it is, my interview with Mayor Sly James of Kansas City, Missouri. Today's thing is this mayor's very crowded desk, and this episode is titled, Time Waits for No One.
29 more. Going down.
I come to you to talk to you today as sort of a byproduct of my research on this skate park in the Columbus Park neighborhood called the Harrison Street DIY, which was a guerrilla-built, frankly, skate park that was built by some skaters who saw a need in their community to build a skate park, and they built one, and then through working with Public Works and working with the neighborhood, they were kind of given permission to use this cul-de-sac paper street over here at 4th and Harrison. What I came to find out through talking to Matt Lowe, who's the president of the neighborhood council, and the skate park builders and the other folks over there, is that there was a need in Kansas City for more of these sort of amenities, I guess, for lack of a better word, these skate parks. And these skate park builders ran into frustration kind of going through normal channels. And so what they decided to do was build this here and go to the neighborhood with an open hand. And the neighborhood embraced that. And what had occurred to me through reading some of your writings and your State of the City addresses and reading your social media is that this is potentially, with some idiosyncrasies changed and some of the details changed, a model to me, not as somebody who runs a city, a model for how other neighborhoods can create this sort of cooperative coalition between the neighborhoods and people who want to do something. This group raised all the money themselves through private donation and funding. They worked with the neighborhood and the city. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, if you see this as instructive for other small groups or communities within Kansas City as a whole to sort of create these amenities for themselves.
I do. I don't. I don't know that works in every circumstance, but wherever possible, I think it's a good idea for people to take control over their own situation. I think there's too many times when people look to government and expect government to do everything. We can't do everything. People constantly, why aren't we doing more for kids? And I have to educate them. We do quite a bit for kids, but we're not their parents, we're not their churches, we're not their school, we're not their disciplinarian, but we provide access to outside activities and Saturday and Friday nights and TNT program through KCNOVA and all the other things. We spend a lot of time, effort, money, and energy trying to make sure. I'm going to a park in the Northeast area to talk to Somali kids tonight about soccer fields with the Parks Department. We do what we can, but we have very limited resources. 76% of our budget is tied up in fire and police and ambulance. That doesn't leave a whole lot of money to do other things. A lot of times, some of the things that people want, we agree they should have. We can't afford to put a chicken in every pot. So if somebody is raising their own chickens and putting them in other people's pots, hey, I'm all for it. I think that one of the best things that could happen is people getting out and taking control of their neighborhoods and doing things that make sense for them. I want them to do it right. I want them to be safe about doing it, and I want them to make sure that they're crossing the necessary T's and I's. Because one thing I think sometimes people start to do things and then they don't realize that it's not as easy as it looks, and they stop halfway, and then that creates a problem. But there's no reason for people to not take their neighborhoods and their ideas in hand and put them to action.
One of the things that came up, it's funny you say that, because one of the things that came up through reporting on that story was that what these guys realized is really quickly this became about more than a skate park for them, because they saw that, I have photos of them working with some of the Somali refugee children in the neighborhood and teaching them how to skate, building them skateboards. And it became really clear to these 20-something guys that were building the skate park that this was bigger than that skate park. And I think that enabled them to see this further through, to not let this turn into a half-done.
Yeah, they had an obligation. They created something, and now they feel responsible. Responsibility to themselves, the neighborhood, and to the others that are involved is a great motivating force. And I think it's great that they were working with the young kids in the neighborhood. That's exactly what we want to see. That's what we need. That's how we make sure the kids have somebody who's more older than them and maybe an adult in their lives that are going to, be emotional support and go-to people, mentors, so to speak. That's exactly what we want. But and it's great that it's organic. Sometimes when you try and force it or build it from the exterior, it doesn't work. It's better when it's organic, and this sounds like it was organic from the jump.
Does it surprise you now as mayor, after 6 years almost in the role? Do you see examples of this that you didn't expect you'd see when you started that are really surprising, where people do this?
I don't know if I'd say that I didn't expect to see. I've always thought that people could do things in their neighborhoods. There are some neighborhood associations that do a ton of stuff, a lot of really good stuff. And I was talking to a young man today who had gotten his other neighbors together because he was concerned about where the kids were playing and how they were playing. So he got some neighbors together, and they've created a better, safer environment for their kids to play. The guy that built the golf course over in Ivanhoe, so I'm never surprised by the ingenuity and the responsibility of people in the city. I expect it because I think that's the type of city we are. I think that one of the things that I like the most is that we're doing more and more of it. And the reason we're doing more and more of it is because we've changed our attitude. We used to be a city of, well, we can't do that because. And now I think what people are saying is, what if? What if we did this? What if we did that? What would we need to do so and so? And I'm fine with that. I think that's a great thing to do. I think to the extent people start doing those types of things in an organic, spontaneous sort of way, the more they're going to understand and appreciate the role of government. We simply can't be everywhere, do everything, and be all to all. It just doesn't work. So as people, that's one of the whole things about the whole CID idea, where neighborhoods, business areas, whatever, become CIDs, so that they can have input into their own situation and raise money in order to support their own needs. I love it. So surprised? No. Gratified, happy, humbled? Yes.
There's this other organization that I've kind of seen you've worked with them a little bit, and that is the Mothers in Charge group, which I think, especially considering the kind of year we've had so far in terms of homicides in Kansas City, I think this is a literal life affirming group who's kind of taken this approach of, we are going to be in charge and create change in our community ourselves. Do you remember when that group kind of caught your attention? And
well, they became adjunct to KCNOVA, so I was on one of the original board members of NOVA, and I don't know exactly when they entered in, but it was pretty early in the process. And they've grown since then, and we've had a pretty good and robust relationship with them. They're at every call-in. I see Roz fairly frequently. We've helped her and some of her others get to DC and other places they need, and with vehicles and things of that nature. So they're a very good group that we work very closely with and that we support. And, it's pity that we have to have them at all, but it is what it is.
Okay, before we go on, I just want to drop in here and explain what these call-ins are that Mayor James talks about. As part of the KCNOVA program, the organization holds these quarterly events where they call people who could be victims or perpetrators of violent crime into some place like a church or other neutral ground to give them a warning. We know who you are, we know what you're up to, and just don't. They give these people they've called in a chance to access social services, job training, counseling, whatever. And these call-ins are basically a wake-up call. It's time to turn it around or face the consequences. And here's Mayor Sly James explaining the importance of KC Mothers in Charge in those call-in events.
Well, they seem to have a real connection with some of the people that we have in call-ins. Our surveys of these folks that come to the call-ins indicate that they rank them very high on the issues of, I listen to them, I pay attention to what they say. These are the ones that I think are most effective. And that being said, I mean, it's kind of a different connection. Now, some of that connectivity has led to some of these folks getting into the social programs of KCNOVA, which is good and seldom gets really an adequate mention. But we have 80 plus people that have walked away from the situations they were in and gotten into getting social services that they needed in order to stay away, whether it's job training or getting a social security card, birth certificate, more education, skills, getting skilled up for whatever it is. That's what our social service arm does. And I would say that Mothers in Charge is one of the primary impetus for some of that going on. Because they basically do talk to these young men, most of whom are men, and a few young women about you don't want to be standing where we're standing, and you don't want your parents standing where we're standing, and there's a way out. So I see them as an integral part of the team, just like everybody else when it comes to the whole deal.
This thing I imagine for you can probably get really frustrating, when there's a murder or homicide in Kansas City and you hear about it, and you have to speak to it sort of publicly in a leadership voice. What's the dialogue in your head like when you're in that position, when you have to speak to that?
Wow, that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure. I've never thought about it in that type of thing. But what I think about is that it's frustrating to have so many happen, and it's frustrating to be able to do so little to prevent it. There is this thought that permeates out there in the Twitterverse or social media verse that somehow, as the mayor, I should be able to stop homicides. That's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. It's kind of like, hey, mayor, stop the sun from coming up today or make it cooler. There are some things that I believe would have had negative or would have kept the numbers lower when you have a state legislature that basically has said there are no more gun laws. Do what the hell you want. We were talking about it at the KCNOVA board meeting today. There was a situation with a 17-year-old with a gun. They couldn't take it away from him. There's no, what's a 17-year-old doing with a Glock? What does he need it for? And he was stopped. He was in a car that was stopped, but he wasn't the primary person. So they found his gun, and it was his gun. They can't do anything about that. If your gun is stolen, and you don't even have to report it to the police. If you lose it, you don't have to report it to the police. Basically, and now they want to make it easier to get silencers. Why? Okay? When you have a huge number of guns on the street, you're going to have a lot more people dying. It's just that damn simple. Why do we think those Oklahoma gang members were here that got shot a week or so ago? They thought their barbecue was better than in Oklahoma City? I don't think so. This place has become, because of its loose gun laws, it's a mecca for people who want to buy guns or sell guns. Frankly, if you want to sell guns in Oklahoma, come to Kansas City where you can get them cheap, take them back to Oklahoma and sell them at a profit. A lot of guns being run right now, but nobody seems to care about that. The logic in my mind is very simple. If you've got two cars on the highway, the chances of them being involved in an accident, not very high. 50 cars, a little higher. 1 million cars, there's going to be accidents all over the place. We got 1 million guns. It's just that simple. People are going to get shot. Frankly, the people who have guns and shouldn't have guns have those guns so that if they ever think they may need a gun, they can use it. And we do nothing to find out who should and who shouldn't. It's stupid. And I'm frustrated as hell that there's nothing we can do on a local level to stop that. There's nothing we can do on a local level to curb that. And I know that as soon as you mention guns, all the pro-gun people come out and say, you're trying to take away our guns. Nobody is trying to take away anybody's gun. But if you believe that every single person who wants a gun should have one, that's crazy. And if you believe that they shouldn't, that there should be a way for people who shouldn't have guns to not have them, then what is the process by which we do that? And why do we need a proliferation of handguns in cars riding around in the streets of Kansas City? Does anybody see a correlation there? I get so frustrated with the fact that we know what's in front of us. We know what needs to be done. We know what could save lives, and there is not a political will to do it. None. Let us do it on the city level if you guys don't want to do it on the state level, and they won't let us do it on the city level.
Well, this issue of preemption that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, the minimum wage in St. Louis, the gun laws in the urban cities in a state like Missouri, and you have it happening in state by state by state where these, the government that's closest to the people that affects their lives the most makes a decision, and a government that's further away preempts that.
What people don't know is that a lot of this legislation is cookie cutter legislation that's used by the right-wing aspect of the Republican Party. It's an organization called ALEC, A-L-E-C, American Legislative Exchange Group. And they publish and promulgate cookie cutter information that can be used in any state. where there's a Republican legislature. There's even been instances where there's been legislation introduced in one state where they didn't scrub it enough to get the previous state's name out of it, and they introduced it with the wrong state name in it. I mean, it's that cookie cutter. And the legislators go to these lavish meetings and things like that where they're basically given gifts and access and money and all sorts of other stuff simply to pass this stuff. This is not problem-solving legislation. This is problem-creating legislation. It's legislation designed to push a political ideology. It is not legislation pushed to solve problems. And that's the problem with the whole thing. That's why I like local government. We don't have all these political hang-ups. We have to deliver services every day. We don't have time for ideological arguments. But on the state and federal level, where it's my party is better than your party and I'm going to beat your party up if it comes to my neighborhood, that's nothing but nonsense. It doesn't help this country, doesn't help this state. What it does is it helps people push their ideology. And that's fine and dandy. But the ideological arguments seldom solve long-term critical human problems in this state. The ideological divide over issues like health care, seriously? We're going to fight it because I believe that you shouldn't have health care and I believe you shouldn't? And you should? Well, I mean, seriously, can there be any doubt that the richest country on earth should have health care for its people, be able to take care of its poor? But not under certain ideologies. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Free market. Free market worked quite a bit. That's why we have poor people, right? Seriously. So yeah, frustrated.
If the you who was back in either at Rockhurst or mediating or in the law firm, if the you now could say something to the person that was the you before you were elected, what do you think the you now would say to them?
Any program that you start that you think has longevity and is actually getting the job done, make sure that you establish it in such a way that it's sustainable outside of government. Okay? Because what happens is that somebody, especially with an incumbent in place, somebody wants to run against an incumbent. The first thing they do is they talk about why the incumbent is a bozo. All the stuff that they didn't make any sense, doesn't work, yada, yada. I'm going to do it a different way, okay? So whether or not the incumbents' programs did work or are working or need more time to fully explore whether they can work, the new people have to run on something. They're not going to come in and say, you know what? The incumbent's a nice guy doing some really good stuff, and I think we ought to continue it, but I think you ought to elect me to continue it. That doesn't work, not in most people's minds. So they come in and they oppose what's being done. Now, those programs that are there, they may have merit. They may actually have the ability to help solve a problem. They may be a perfect example. Obamacare. Obamacare might not be perfect legislation. But does that mean you throw it out because a new person comes in? Or do you tweak it and make it better so that it serves the purpose and it cuts out some of the problems? Do you just keep working on it and working on it and working on it until you get it to a point where you say, that's pretty good? It's a pretty big bite. It takes a long time. It's a complicated subject. There's no way in hell you're going to pass a bill, put it into play, and it's going to say, oh, wow, this is working perfectly. It takes time. But what's the goal? Is the goal for one party to beat the other? Or is the goal to provide health care to the average American citizen? If the goal is the latter, then why does the new party come in and want to get rid of it and put in something else, which right now nobody seems to like or think is going to work? So if you want something that has potential, something that is going to have sustainability in addressing long-term societal issues, poverty, violence, education, whatever other human conditions need to be addressed, you can incubate it and do a startup in government, but you need to set it up so that when you leave office, it's going to continue on its own path without having to make sure that the next person coming in doesn't just scrap it. That's what I would tell myself. That's what I've learned. That's exactly what we've done with Turn the Page KC, because we know it's working. We see the results. We had a chart today that counted down the number of kids in 2011 that were reading proficiently versus those who weren't, and every year it's gone down, down, and down. Those numbers of those who weren't are going down. The numbers of those who are going up. It's working. We went from 33.8% proficiency to 53% proficiency. It's working. Is it worth continuing? Hell yeah. Why? Because now we know that there are more kids able to read at third grade, which means they're going to be able to read to learn from third grade on, which means they're not going to be one of the huge number of people sitting in prisons with fourth grade reading aptitudes. And there's a reason why it's fourth grade reading.
Because that's where it stops.
Bingo. 75% of the kids who aren't reading proficiently at third grade never catch up. They tend to have more negative contacts with the police. They tend to either graduate slower in high school or not graduate at all. They tend to be the ones who wind up committing crimes or being involved in crime and being incarcerated. They die earlier, even if they stay out of it, because they don't have the options. They make less money. There's nothing good about it. So we wanted to make darn sure that we were going to set up this program in a way that it was sustainable outside of this building and outside of government, so that regardless of who's sitting here next time, that work will continue because it's valuable. That's something I learned, and that's something I'll tell the next person who comes in.
As the son of a single mother who was a reading teacher in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, I really appreciate the value of that program because I'm here and able to do this because of that.
That's why we're an All-American city this year, because of that. That's why we won 7 communication awards because of that. That's why we're recognized nationwide, is because of that program and the work that the board does and all of our partners do, because it's important. It's taking care of our kids. People say we ought to do more for the youth. First thing we ought to make sure about the youth is that we provide them with every educational option available so that they can compete. Because a kid that has hope and believes that they can compete, they're less likely to be a problem. They're less likely to need to have somebody babysitting them. They can find their way around. They're less likely to have problems finding a job. They're more likely to go to college or trade school or start a business or to learn how to do something with their hands. Not every kid has to go to college. Frankly, a lot of kids shouldn't go. Some kids are better building stuff, and we need stuff built, period. And not everybody has to go to college in order to have a successful life and job and career.
But they have to be able to read.
They have to. If you can't read, you can't do anything in this society anymore. It's becoming much, much, much too technical. And those jobs where all you have to do is push a broom or put a screw on something or a lug nut at a plant, you better know how to deal with a computer. And if you can't read, you're going to have problems dealing with a computer.
Yeah. I've allowed you to take me over your time.
That's all right.
But I have that
And
was
that's a good way of saying it.
yeah. Thank you. I'm learning. I've been doing this for 5 months and 20 days, but I'm starting to figure a few things out. I want to thank you so much for doing this and for answering my tweets.
Yeah, not a problem. I haven't been as active on Twitter lately as I have been before. I've just really been buried and busy.
Have you started to get reflective yet?
Oh, I don't know. I tend to always be a little bit reflective, but I think it's coming more and more with the shortness of tenure.
Well, when you have some spare time, I want to talk to you when you have time to be reflective.
Sure. Probably July 30th of 2019, I'll be reflecting a lot.
Fair enough.
So I'll be out on the 31st.
I'll be doing this with any luck.
Yeah, there you go.
I want to sincerely thank Mayor Sly James and his staff for their time and help in lining up this interview. The music for Iconoclast of Things is composed and performed by me. I had editorial assistance on this episode from Matt Hodap of Fountain City Frequency. If you visit iconoclastofthings.com, you'll find photos from today's episode, and you'll see how you can make future episodes possible. Now, I produce Iconoclast of Things independently, without financial support or influence of anyone or anything but the story. But I need you to make that work. So please visit iconoclastofthings.com and click the Support This Pod link to make a contribution to my work. I have a page at patreon.com/iconoclastofthings where you can arrange to make a recurring pledge of support. Now, all these small contributions really do help. And please, if you listen on iTunes, give me a rating and a review and tell your friends about the podcast. You can find me on Twitter at IoTPod or on facebook.com/IoTpod. Until next time, I'm John Evans, and you've been listening to Iconoclast of Things.